Today on the Cameron Journal podcast, I'm joined by Dennis Brennan. I've always loved that name. I had a childhood name who had Brennan as a first name when I was a kid. And his dad was a doctor and lived in a really cool house in outside of Denver. Anyway, back to Dennis. As I strolled down memory lane, Dennis is the author of a new book called DC Swamp Strikes Back, Aaron Burr, Donald Trump, and their similar battles. So I think I know where this book's probably going because I know a lot about Aaron Burr. So we're going to find out more about him, his book, his writing, and where all this comes from. So welcome, Dennis, to the Cameron Journal podcast.
Well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yes, and thank you for emailing in from the John Didakis interview. So that was a good get for us. So why don't we start from the beginning? Tell us a little about yourself. I know you're an attorney, but tell us a little about yourself and your book.
Okay. Yeah, just the overview. I am an attorney. I have been for over 30 years. I've practiced all kinds of law, commercial law, real estate, some of it involving litigation, some of it involving just, doing contracts and so forth. I was trained as a journalist, so I did some reporting and editing, small community newspapers. I even owned one at one time. So I have that background also. Had a great interest in politics since I was just a child, walking precincts. So that's where the knowledge for it comes in. I've held office, actually, public office, was elected as a trustee in my village that I grew up in when I was 25. I've served at the village level. I was a library district trustee. I was a township collector. School board member and school board president then for 6 years as I got older, and served on a board of health for 15 years. So I've been on a lot of different boards. So I have kind of a different perspective of being somewhat of an insider at times and also an outsider covering it as a news guy.
Well, for a second, I was waiting for the state house run, the state senate run, the congressional run.
I think I've been rejected. I think my days of being an elected official are, over.
Yeah. So, well, why don't you tell us about this book, DC Swamp Strikes Back? Where did you get the idea? Tell us a little bit about it, and where did the idea come from?
Yeah, the book, as you might guess, compares the battles that Aaron Burr had with the people running the government at the time. Mm-hmm. And Aaron Burr was vice president. Most of his trouble happened after he was vice president. He was there for one term, Thomas Jefferson's vice president in Jefferson's first term. It compares Burr to what Trump went through from really when he became president all the way to when he was elected for the second time. So it takes a look at the various cases each of them had, the attempts to either imprison them, or in Burr's case, he was charged with treason a couple of times. So you could actually be killed for treason. Yeah. The way I had the idea for the book is a friend of mine who's a Democrat political consultant, Lloyd Boterney, wrote a book about Aaron Burr. And it was kind of something that he brought to me, and he said, take a look at the book. He gave me one. I read it, came back a few weeks later and asked me, what do you think? And I said, I loved the writing because he is a good writer. We have different political ideas, but still friends. And I said, but I think you missed the real story. The way Burr was treated is how Trump has been treated by Washington. And at that time, Trump had not yet, won his election. And he looked at me like I was nuts, as Democrats sometimes look at Republicans and vice versa. I saw that stare from him, and I said, well, all right, if you don't mind, I'll write my own book. So he kind of lit the fire in me as someone who I've always wanted to write, but he provided that the ignition for me to do something. And that was the idea. That's where it came from.
No, that's quite impressive. There's not a lot of material on Burr. The focus tends to be on Alexander Hamilton. and other luminous names. I mean, I always tell people, there's a wonderful book by David McCullough about Benjamin Franklin. I read it when I was in high school, and I tell everyone, if there is one book about the founders you should read, it's David McCullough's Benjamin Franklin. Um, and because it is an excellent look into the time, the politics, the revolution, the early days of the republic, all this type of thing. And because it's Ben Franklin, all the players are there, so you get shades of everybody else too. There's not much written about Aaron Burr, although I feel like there should be, given the nature of him being a raucous outsider, and I think him having such a contrasting view of what the American experiment should be compared to even Madison, or, I mean, obviously him and Jefferson were in very much alignment, but compared to some of the other founders. What do you think about that?
I think you're right. I mean, you hit on several good points there. Burr, first of all, yes, not very well known, and how he is known is for his duel with Alexander Hamilton. Most of us,
and the story is always about Hamilton.
Yes, it's about Hamilton. Burr's the bad guy. Right?
Yes,
every
always.
Time you hear it. And I think all of us, no matter what teacher you had in school, that's what you learned. There was a duel. The bad guy won. He killed the good guy. Having Hamilton the musical probably didn't help Burr either.
No. Yes.
And I think, the other thing you brought up is Burr being an outsider. He came, nobody knew what to make of him. And they were impressed with him, with speaking, but they were also distrustful of him. Yeah. And he ends up, becoming the vice president. And on the second try, I mean, Jefferson lost the first time with Burr running as his vice president, which is kind of it's astounding to think, oh, let's do it again. That's not likely to happen now, right?
No,
you're not.
No.
Most of us are going to say Kamala Harris, and and is not going to run again. And if she was, or she's not going to be the nominee. If she would be the nominee, I doubt she picks the same VP candidate. It's just
Trump did not call Mike Pence in 2024. Yeah. So you'll notice the current vice president is JD Vance, a nice man from Ohio.
Yeah, I mean, it's, generally when you lose, people aren't looking for you to make a return engagement. And
True. Yeah.
So it's a little strange, but I think this goes to Burr. While he was an outsider, he was a bright politician. And what he did in that time period after they lost, and he was blamed by Jefferson's people, not Jefferson, for the loss. Like, he didn't bring in the votes. So he went back to New York, another New Yorker like Trump, and he basically had legislators elected there because the state, at that time, the state legislature would decide where those electoral votes went. So by doing that, he elected their people, Burr people, who would be loyal for Jefferson. And that turned the election. New York swung over to Jefferson's side, and they were able to win easily, although it also brought into scope the first tie, because Burr and Jefferson tied. And at that time, there was no distinction. While they ran for president and vice president, there was no distinction in who wins. You would think that's kind of a silly.
Well, you'll notice that they changed that very short. I always laugh. I said that you ended up in situations where the man who lost was supposed to be vice president. That lasted 15 years, and they changed it. The people that wrote it were like, this is awful and not working. We have to amend the Constitution. So, that's...
Yeah, and they probably just never thought it would happen, right? But logically, when you think about it, most people, do vote for the same. Oh, that's my running mate. They're not saying, gee, I hate that running mate. I'm going to vote for the other guy.
Yeah.
Why? Because you wouldn't want to have a situation like Adams and Jefferson had, where you're the vice president in the wrong party. And opposite party. I don't want to say.
Although that would make modern politics incredibly entertaining.
Yes, it would, except, with breaking ties in the Senate, you might actually have the tie going the wrong way, and that's a problem.
And big shout out to, I think it's the 12th Amendment that solves that problem. So it's 11 or 12. I can never remember which. I think it's big shout out to the early amendments for solving this problem.
Right. Some of those amendments were definitely needed. As good as a job that they've done on the Constitution, it has to be amended at times because,
Yeah.
there are things I think they just didn't think of. And that's
Well,
the,
it's also this is an I mean, we have to remember it's an experiment. I mean, it's I think the founders would be shocked that we're still using the same constitution 250 years on. I think that would absolutely blow their minds, sort of thing. Because I mean, Jefferson openly said, "Yeah, every 20 years you should tear it down and write something new," sort of thing. And I think he would be shocked that we're still using the same fundamental system with a lot of, there's obviously been 27 other changes since the original, and 17 of them happened, after he had passed on. But yeah, I think he would be shocked at that fact alone, sort of thing.
it's probably a testament to the great job that they did in crafting it, but also
I
maybe
would
to how
agree. Yeah.
politics has been so divisive for so long. And it was divisive then too, so maybe they should have seen that, it would be stagnant. You couldn't really move if there's too many things built in the black movement. And we see it all the time now.
Yeah, and especially also, I think one of the things I always one of kind of my chief criticisms of the Constitution is political parties were forming during the Constitutional Convention, and they didn't build a system that accounted for that. And people kind of like, because people from other countries are kind of like, what's up with your political parties? I'm like, you don't understand. Our political system was never supposed to have political parties. They formed almost immediately. Even by the time Adams, second president, gets elected, political parties are in place. But our system isn't built for it in the same way parliamentary systems are. So we have this awkward first past the post system that really optimizes for a two-party system. But people also forget that having multiple parties winning votes in the Electoral College happened as recently as 1948. Strom Thurmond won 13 electoral votes in the election of 48. In the 19th century, it wasn't unheard of at all to have a 3-4 split. That's how they ended Reconstruction. Rutherford B. Hayes says, yes, I'll get rid of Reconstruction. Compromise of 1877 happens. Reconstruction ends. Hayes goes to the White House. Like, this was not an unheard of thing. This whole idea that we know who the election's going to win on election night because the news has called it and we know how the votes are going to go down, that's a very modern thing. It was not always that clean and cut and dried. So,
but we become used to it.
we have
TV,
become
TV,
accommodated to
it's
it. Yeah.
become now if there's any pushback, it's the other way. Like we need to know right away
Yes.
because we're now very much used to it, even in close elections. Like, okay, the next day, that's it. We need to know. And
Yeah, which is so strange because it really wasn't that way for the longest time. And maybe even just going for the two-party system. I mean, if for those of who were alive for the Ross Perot affair in '92, know how much the major parties got together to make sure that there wouldn't be any third-party outsiders anymore. But unfortunately, our system, even at the congressional level, kind of optimizes for that. And if there's any one thing I would change, it would be fractional representation, which would accommodate political parties a la Germany, a la Canada, a la France, so that the requirement to get a seat in Congress is maybe 25%, not 50. So you would end up with, fractional representation, which would also make Congress a lot larger. Our national legislature is too small. So yeah.
well,
So,
whether they're too small or not,
yeah.
that's a big ask to change.
No, I mean, it is. It is absolutely huge, and it would change American politics in a big,
Yeah.
in a big way. I was just saying on the thread of yes, I think the Constitution. One of its amazing things is it is the document on which the greatest nation ever has been built, and I think the founders would be surprised we're still using it. But I also agree with you. That's also why it's an amazing document. Is it has endured through world wars, civil wars,
Yeah.
amendments, massive social change. I mean, when it was written only white landowning males could vote, now we have universal suffrage. I mean, and women vote and all this sort of thing. I mean, it is,
Yeah.
and it has endured through all of that social change. It has endured. It has been the guide stone on which the American system is built. And that is a testimony to the wisdom of the founders. I'm turning into a Republican right now. I'm supposed to be a coastal liberal. I'll go back to being one in a moment. So I'll say something terribly leftist and progressive in a moment. But it's yeah, no, it is a testament to the amazing wisdom of that and
Uh,
how it has
yeah.
endured.
I think you're right. And I think maybe they're, when they thought it wouldn't last, maybe they're more humble than we think, because we think
Yeah,
of those founding fathers, and I think most of us hold them in high esteem compared to politicians of, the last 10, 20, 30 years, whatever you want to pick out.
they
We
have
just,
been mythologized a little bit, and I'm reminded of that because you have that Ronald Reagan book over your head, and there's a lot of. I think Reagan particularly really got that mythology of the founders going in the modern era and kind of
yeah,
really kind of got in the national imagination, that the founders of this have sort of become larger than life a little bit, which is kind of
yeah.
sad why we don't know more about Aaron Burr because he's part and parcel of that club, sort of thing.
Kind of, yes. I mean, I don't know if he would think he was part of the club, but he was. Any of
Yeah,
those men that were there at the time, they had their little disagreements or big disagreements, as it turns out, like with Hamilton and Burr.
right.
I guess when you're having a duel, that's a big disagreement.
Someone may
You know,
die. That seems it should be about something important.
yeah, if you're going to be pointing guns at each other, it is interesting though how history Burr has always been kind of the guy not mentioned, and I get it because vice presidents, how many do you remember? If
Right.
you take a poll of people and you ask, yeah, you might remember the ones that succeeded a president, but how far can you go back and really name all the vice presidents? You'll
Yeah.
probably get tripped up in your own mind, no matter how brilliant you are in history. It's going to
Yeah.
be a tough one.
I,
And
I have 2 degrees in political science and don't ask me anything much earlier than about Reagan about 1980 or so. After that, it gets real muddy real fast.
well, yeah, but even at the time when they asked people, there were polls. I remember polls being done when George H.W. Bush was president,
Yeah.
and the question was, who's the vice president? And like 90% of the people in a poll didn't know who the vice president was. Now,
No.
I thought that was amazingly stupid that that we had that kind of lack of. I don't know if it's intelligence or just people didn't care and probably still don't, despite
Yeah.
all the arguing back and forth. I think social media has just made it appear that we all care deeply about politics. I'm not sure that we do as a general rule.
Yeah.
Some people do. Some people care only about politics. But,
Yeah.
when you don't know that, maybe it's not surprising that people forget Burr was the vice president, you know. And then some people will remember Burr, and we go into the, book about what they called the Spanish conspiracy and then became the Burr conspiracy also,
Yeah.
where, he was accused of treason over it, tried twice. The idea being he was going to form his own army. There was some evidence to that extent.
Yeah.
I look at it from the viewpoint, and I think, the reason he was exonerated is they just didn't have the evidence. For treason, you need two witnesses present, and they didn't have that. And, now did he actually make plans, and what were his plans? He always denied that he was going to, have his own army and go to war with Spain over, what is the western part of the United States now. But it's
Right.
interesting, uh, and maybe
No,
he
no.
did.
Yeah. No, but I think also there's that there was that sense of that what we would later call manifest destiny, that idea that, yeah, we need to start going out that way, and then Jefferson, they
Yeah.
could do the Louisiana Purchase and double the size of the country overnight, and yeah, it's. I think he was definitely part of that. But I do want to drill into a little bit. Because obviously we know about the Burr and Hamilton thing. What do you think Aaron Burr's vision for this country was?
I mean, I think different authors have talked about that. Everything from, if you believe those who, um, you know, were against him, I guess, that he really did want to form a second country,
Yeah,
where we wouldn't have had, the United States spreading out west. We would have had a new country taking up the western part and I guess into Mexico. It's hard to tell because I think when you're looking back that far, what were his intentions? And now the intentions of politicians, right? They're on TV all the time. They're on social
right.
media, good or bad.
Yeah,
Uh, they're kind of telling you. I think they would like to get out of those statements, years later when they're called upon and say, "Well, you said this 10 years ago." Oh, did I? I mean, there's evidence you said it or you did something. With the way the country was back in Burr's time, it's hard to, you know, actually get that information and keep it in the public's eye. So, did he have it? Some people think he had that intention. I think he's always, at least what I've seen, he always said that he wanted, the same United States that we have, that we would spread west. But I think there's
no.
there's enough people that have questioned that.
Yeah, no, I was kind of looking for your own perspective on that, and I was mostly kind of also kind of doing the big kind of long ramp into the comparison with Donald Trump and an outside. We were that was I was kind of giving a little on ramp to talk about that, but it's okay. But let's jump into that though. Let's talk about how did you compare Aaron Burr and his own kind of unique outsider's perspective on the Republic, and Donald Trump kind of coming out of entertainment, not thought of as a politician, to, now dominating American politics for a solid decade, both in and
Yeah,
out of office.
that's true. He has really, and it'll be interesting to see if he's able to dominate it as the former president. I suppose if he has that kind of control over the party that he has now. Usually you
Yeah.
don't, right? But he
Yeah.
might be a special case. The Yeah, I think when you look at both of these guys, you touched upon they're both outsiders. Burr had the legal background, but Trump had the business acumen. Both came from
Yes.
successful families. Burr's father started Princeton University, so I don't think you could say either of these guys were on the street, poor, working their way up the ladder. They both started off pretty well. Highly educated. I think
Hmm.
you see Burr though having the same problem I think that Trump did in his first term when
Hmm.
they enter national office, not realizing what they're really up against.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of people that are successful local politicians or even in their state, and then they go to
Hmm.
Washington and they get beaten 6 ways to Sunday because you really don't realize what you're against. I think in both those eras, you had strong. I mean, the media right now. I'm not a big fan of the media, even though that was my training. It's become so divisive, and really, it's hard to trust a lot of things you see in the media. And then I think viewers and readers tend to go to places that just information they think it's going to be something they agree with rather than checking it out. So, Burr had kind of a similar problem. Alexander Hamilton started the New York Post, which is still around,
Yeah.
and the parties had control of these newspapers through, you know, advertising and so forth. But even prior to advertising, they had the party press era where they just outright owned the paper. And,
Yeah.
as the publisher of the paper, you're going to write what you want. And you're probably not going to write about your friends. Burr didn't have many friends in the press. And I'd say Trump hasn't had many friends in the press. So each of them found, I think, that the sledding was tough when they hit Washington. I don't know. It also looks like they were kind of naive about that. That they didn't realize, like for instance, with Burr, you had a lot of people in Jefferson's inner circle, the Virginia, family basically, that had
Right.
the idea that they would have the presidency year after year after year. So some of them didn't want Burr, a New Yorker, getting in there, and they
Right.
worked hard to make sure he wouldn't be there for the second term.
Right.
So I think, the same way when Trump came into Washington, even his own party, which I think his own party maybe looked at him like, well, you're not really a Republican. You're a Democrat
Yeah.
who decided to run as a Republican.
Yeah.
And they might not have been wrong. So, but now he's kind of transformed that party into his own or his own vision. So,
No, I would say the Trump takeover of the GOP is most complete.
most complete. And now has put people who are more in line with his thinking.
Hmm.
And you notice the book on Reagan for years, if you watch, conventions or just talk to Republicans who are running, they always wanted to be associated with Reagan. And
Yeah.
everybody spoke of Reagan in glowing terms. I think now that doesn't matter. What matters is, are you with Trump or are you against Trump? If you're a
Yeah.
Republican, that's important. I guess it's important
No,
even with the Democrats.
2018 midterms, I told people, you know how the Trump takeover of the GOP is complete? You have people going to town halls asking their congressperson only one question that matters, and that's are they on board with Trump or not? And if the answer is no, they're probably losing. And if the answer is yes, then they're probably going to stay. And that was when I knew that Trump had really gotten a hold of the GOP.
Yeah, I think that's true. And the problem you have for some office holders is they're in districts or states
Yeah.
where it's not as easy.
Yeah.
I'm in Illinois, so the northern part very Democrat. Southern Illinois is very pro-Trump, very Republican,
Very, yeah.
but most of the votes come out of the city of Chicago and the surrounding counties.
Hmm.
So those congressmen that were there then, there's less now. They
Yep.
had to try to figure out how to deal with that. They didn't deal with it very well because they lost. So
Yeah.
you had that problem in swing districts. Do you run away from him? Because you're also running away from the Republican voters who are supporting Trump.
Yeah.
And to that point where they're asking that question, are you with him or not? Because what they're telling you is they have an opinion formed of him. And I think most people probably have formed an opinion of Donald Trump for many years. Maybe it's changed over the years,
Yeah.
but they have an opinion of him.
No, I mean, I think Trump 2.0 is definitely much more Washington savvy than Trump 1.0. And I think I think I mean, from a GOP perspective, the 4 years out of power was almost convenient because, um, I think it gave them a chance to, figure out really what went wrong and find out the positions to replace and all that type of thing, and Lord knows they haven't even been in office a year, and they have radically transformed the government to be in line with their agenda and goals. Being ignorant of how Washington works is not a new thing or even a not recent phenomena. The Obamas were hopeless. I wrote an article several years ago talking about Obama and the no good, very bad presidency, where I said, honestly, this was a complete disaster. And part of it was because no one in Obama's inner circle knew how to work in Washington, D.C. None of them had any experience in Washington, and Obama himself had only been there a handful of years, 3, 4 years.
Mhm.
And I said a lot of the reason why Mitch McConnell got away with what he got away with, and a lot of the things didn't get done simply was they didn't know how Washington worked, and Washington ate them up and spit them right back out. And so, it's a very important thing to have people who understand how Washington works. I think Trump 2.0 has struck that balance in a very interesting way. because he has a nice mix of people who have been in Washington, who do know Washington, but people who are have their own ideas and are on board with his particular agenda. A lot of that agenda has come out of, the right wing think tank system, which is where a lot of the new ideas in the GOP usually come from. But there's definitely a much greater alignment and a much greater understanding in Trump 2.0, which has allowed them to do a lot of things very quickly, in a way that was not true in the first term. So,
I think you're right. I think that inexperience in that first term
yeah,
shows. I think he thought, well, I can do this, or they'll go along with me because I think it's a good idea, or for whatever reason. And I think some of his advisors, if you want to compare that part, he went with people that he really didn't trust, but maybe were more in line with the establishment, the established Republican Party.
the
And
donors
that might
wanted
have been
it,
a
the party
mistake.
wanted it. Yeah, yeah,
I mean, now he may, you see the group that he has in now, it's his team. I mean, many
yeah.
of them were involved in the campaign, the second campaign. There
No,
was no,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and it's funny because, you make that analysis about Obama, and he had, David Axelrod was brilliant, but he was also a Chicago guy. He
Yeah.
wasn't really a Washington guy.
Same problem with
And
Valerie Jarrett. Yeah.
right. And those are, they might be brilliant people. And that's always a problem, I think, in Washington, that you might have these people, you go, well, they're very smart. I'll get this through. There's more to it than that. I think, Trump didn't understand in the first term, like, no, they're gonna do things to counter what you're trying to do. So, you take immigration, for instance, you see a big difference of how it was handled in the first term to now. Now, I
Yeah.
guess they could argue the problem is bigger now. More people have come into the country, and they wouldn't be wrong.
Yeah.
But I think it's also the way they're dealing with it that's much different, and probably and more effective to getting where the Trump administration wants to go.
Yeah, well, and I think also, I think there's also Trump has a lot less pressure from donors in the party to take people who are not necessarily on board with his agenda. So the party, I mean, in those 4 years he was away, the party got cleaned out. A lot of Congress critters got cleaned out. So now everyone is much more in alignment than they were, the first time around. So I think that also makes things more effective. But I think also it's the learning what departments, what offices, what agencies, all that sort of the bureaucratic stuff. The federal government's huge. It's the largest corporation in the world. Um, it employs a lot of people, minus the military sort of thing. So
Yeah.
there's all that stuff to learn, and that's where having Washington insiders is helpful. And that's where I think, some of the people like a Stephen Miller, even though and even like JD Vance, who actually had real Senate experience, actually has he actually has phone numbers of people to call to get stuff done. That's how Washington works. It's who you know. And I think the big problem that outsiders have is they show up to town, they don't know anybody, which makes it very hard to do anything. And I think that was something poor Aaron Burr just kind of faced in general. He wasn't buddy with the right people necessarily. And that I think always caused him some problems.
I think you're right, and you're not buddies with the right people, and the people that are surrounding the guy you're with, Jefferson, are very distrusting of you. That,
Yeah.
for whatever reason, whether they want to advance themselves, which eventually they did, it's tough to make new friends in Washington, I think, and you know
Yeah.
that's
The
been
old
said
saying
many
goes,
times.
if you want a friend in Washington, buy a dog. Like,
And I
yeah.
think that's, there's some truth to that. And I think both, Trump found out that people he thought were friends weren't friends. They were just people that he contributed money to or saw at fundraising events and
Mhm.
that sort of relationship. It's not the same as I'm your friend and I'm your ally. They were not going to help him in any way and actually were going to hurt him. And I think Burr, yeah, kind of had his eyes wide open at some point where he realized, wait a minute, these guys are actually working against me within this circle. And
Yeah.
in the end, Burr probably figured that out when he was dropped as the vice president. And
Yeah.
Jefferson always played it like it wasn't him. It's like I didn't really pick him to be vice president, the first time, and he was
Right.
kind of, saddled with it. And then the second time he did want Burr, but then the third time he left it open and even told Burr that he was going to leave it open to the party. And that's kind of, wait a minute, I thought I'm your vice president. You're not even friends with the guy that's on your ticket and that's serving with you. That's a little tough. Now with Trump and Pence, you see him drop Pence, but I think after their relationship exploded with, the 2020 election and January 6th, and I'm not sure
Yeah.
Pence wanted to be on there, and I know Trump didn't want him. So
No, I mean, I know Trump did not want Mike Pence back, especially given, you know, Mike Pence not necessarily being as on board the Trump train as Trump anticipated. Um, which some of us viewed that as a godsend, others people view that as a betrayal. Insert your own political opinion of that here. Um, but I think even if Trump had called Mike Pence, I think the answer would have been no. I think it's a very hard sell as a human being when you have people standing outside saying, hang Mike Pence with the pretend gallows, to want to get back into that milieu and be with that person. I think also, given that he was rushed out of the building as the, people were coming in and all this type of thing, I think also probably his wife had about had it with Washington, sort of thing.
yeah,
I think she also was kind of like, yeah, Indiana, it's great. Let's go. Like,
well, right. I think the family. There's always that. I think the other thing is Pence made a political determination, like I think many voters had, that all the issues that Trump was facing would be so large that he couldn't be nominated by the party. And honestly, when all these cases are filed and all the negative publicity on Trump, because that's mostly what you heard, uh, Pence decided he was running for president. That didn't go very far. But I think a lot of voters in the Republican Party were thinking, well, it's going to be DeSantis or it's going to be Nikki Haley or it's going to be whoever,
right.
and that didn't happen. I mean, Trump overcame all that because I think his core supporters saw it differently. And, once he won Iowa, and I think in the book I mentioned where Nikki Haley's quoted as saying it's a two-person race, even though she took third, which I think
Yeah.
is one of the funnier things said in politics. It's why I put it in the book, um,
Yeah.
just for people to chuckle. You look at that and you say, yeah, it's a two-person race. It would be Trump and DeSantis. Get out of the race, Nikki. But
Yeah. No, no. I mean, I think Trump could have also done a little bit more to maybe court Nikki Haley voters. I think there was definitely in 2024, there was definitely a portion of the GOP that was interested in not Trump. I think Trump had so taken over the party by that time that it was sort of fait accompli. I did think it was interesting that there was a wing of the party that was interested in not Trump. Um, I think also, given even what I hear from dyed in the wool MAGA people that I either interview or I go on their shows, talk politics, whatever have you, I find it interesting. Everyone's already talking about 28. They're already talking about life after Trump. And I'm
yeah,
talking dyed in the wool MAGA people who put on the hat every day and do a podcast, like at that level of, and they're already talking about 28 and who's next, what's next, all this type of thing. I think Trump will be very surprised at how the train slows down after the midterms. Um, I think that'll be interesting. I think also, I mean, I think it's going to be a very open field sort of situation, and I think there's going to be, after all of these years, because it will be almost 15 years by the time we get to 28. I think after all of that, I think a lot of people um will be looking for the next thing. a new vision. And I think if you want to secure the GOP nomination in 28, you got to stand on Trump's shoulders but articulate a new vision for the party going forward. You've got to take the best bits, but articulate a vision because people are looking for that. And the first person who can articulate a vision like that with enough Trump stuff to get Trump people in is going to have a very good chance to get the nomination. Someone tell Marco Rubio that's not him, by the way. Just don't even form a committee. Just someone tell Marco Rubio, and that's not you. This doesn't apply to you, Marco. Like,
You're not a fan of Marco Rubio, I take it.
no, I actually like Marco Rubio. I just think him running for president is a waste of people's time. Because he's done it a couple times. That balloon never seems to go anywhere. But
no, he's had a tough time, but he did run into Trump on the one. I think, when you look at that, it's interesting because I think in 2028, a lot will depend on 2026, but probably more importantly, it's what actually gets done. And I think that's why you see the fighting or the resistance. If you want to call the people in the street the French resistance, I don't know. You have people resisting on ICE and any other issue that comes up, which I know that's become politics and is kind of the downside. So even when you have your, depending on where you're sitting, because people, on the other side would say you've got to do that. Now, if that's successful, and in 2026, I don't know, the House switches back. I mean, it's possible the Senate hardly. It's
the
unlikely.
math is bad for Democrats in 26. Yeah.
Right. It does matter, and it matters what did Trump do in those 4 years.
Yeah.
That certainly helps J.D. Vance, for instance.
And it's very obvious J.D. Vance is running for president in 2028. Thank you, J.D.
Yeah.
We understand. Yeah.
And that's a natural move. I mean, vice presidents always do that. I mean, the problem they have is can they beat the other party? And what's the vision that the Democrats are going to have then compared to maybe what they're doing now?
I think J.D. Vance also thinks because he has a lot of the traditional GOP donors that it will be easy for him to walk into the nomination. And he's not entirely wrong about that.
Yeah.
He has Trump credentials and standard GOP money. In today's GOP, that's a winning combination. And I think J.D. Vance is trying to set himself up for that. But he's going to have some competition, and it's going to be interesting because I think Marco Rubio is eyeing another run. Weirdly enough, I think Pete Hegseth thinks he should run for president. I don't think he's correct about that, but I think he's going to want to. I think J.D. Vance is going to have some competition. And that may make it a little bit harder to get across the line than he thinks it's going to be. But I think you're right. I think it's very obvious that J.D. Vance wants to bill himself as keep the party going. It's 1988, everyone, and George H.W. is running for president. That's going to be the mood in 2028. Will be 1988, so that will be the vibe.
It's kind of a repetition, and that'll be time for another book, right? I'll have to come out with a book about 1980, Reagan, the Trump.
Yes.
You can make anything into a book.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But it's we could go on all night, and I got to go make dinner. So I'm starving. I have starving mouths to feed. So, but why don't you let us know where we can keep up with you online and where we can buy the book?
Sure. This is the book. It's once again DC Swamp Strikes Back. Aaron Burr, Donald Trump, and their similar battles.
Yep.
It's available on my website, which is authordennisbrennan.com. It's also available where all fine books are sold, including Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, and pretty much anywhere else online. We'd like you. It's available paperback, Kindle, hard copy, so you can buy it anywhere.
Wonderful. Excellent. All right. Well, thank you so much, Dennis, for coming on the Cameron Journal podcast. We'll be sure to check it out. All right.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it, and I love the conversation.
That's all for this episode of the Cameron Journal podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Visit us online at CameronJournal.com.
We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and I love to talk to my followers and listeners, so please feel free to get us on social media at Cameron Cowan on Twitter, and we'll see you next time on the Cameron Journal Podcast.